want to talk about Fort Hamilton
Yeah.
to start with? Okay.
On the morning of January 3rd, I went to Fort Hamilton for a checkup to see about being drafted. And I spent the day there. I did the physicals and everything, and I was going to be going. And there was a few guys from the town where I came from in Westbury, and we got on a brand new jet airliner going to South Carolina, Fort Jackson. And we got to the airport, and we got down to the Carolinas, and it was around 12:30 by the time we got to where they wanted us to go. And it was cold. So the next day we got up. They started giving us our uniforms, and the next few days we were getting shots and getting haircuts, and so I was in the U.S. Army now. Did my training there, and then we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana from Fort Jackson. And they gave me the folders to care for the guys because I was the oldest. So I always got to carry the paperwork. They gave me about 50 guys to be in charge of. So when the train would stop in Alabama or along the way, some of the people I was in charge for were the ugliest, meanest guys, and they were being drafted, and they knew they were going to Vietnam, so they would get off the train. So by the time I got to Fort Polk, I went in there, and there was a captain there, and I saluted him and gave him the paperwork. He says, "Well, there's only 12 people here. What happened to the rest of them?" I said, "Well, they're between here and Fort Benning." He said, "What do you mean between here and Fort Benning?" I said, "Well, every time the train would stop, a few of them would get off." And he said, "Why didn't you stop them?" I said, "Well, they were bigger than me, meaner than me, and uglier than me. And they knew they were going to Vietnam, so what were you going to do, send them to Vietnam?" But that train ride was really interesting because the railroads of America always go through the back streets of that little town. And so I got to see the little towns backed up to the railroad track. But in Alabama, they had all the decommissioned World War II and Korean ships in the river. As far as you could see were ships all chained together. And I always like to see as much as I can, but when we got to Fort Polk, we knew we'd be there for 2 months doing our advanced infantry training. And it was quite a while that we trained hard and everything, but when we finished, with our training, we came home and I got married on leave. I'll tell about how I ended up making a proposal to get married. Now, I smoked a little doobie, and I had a little doobie with me, and because I didn't drink, so I had a little doobie before I went down to the payphone to call jury. And somehow or another, we talked about that New Year's before I went. We talked about getting married, but I thought it was just talking. Well, now she said, and it's only 2 or 3 weeks before we were finishing AIT. So I think I said yes, we'd get married. And you know, there was no way for her to call me, so she'd have to wait for me to call her. Next thing I knew, she had the Garden City Hotel rented, had the wedding dates planned and everything. I said, well, this isn't so bad. I said, I need somebody to write to me and send me things. And she wasn't a bad person. I thought she was pretty nice. And so I went from being a single man 3 weeks prior to that to where when I got home to Westbury, my mom and dad came up for the wedding, and my brother Jake sold his 57 Chevy. So we got married in the Catholic church and then in the Methodist church. And we went for the party at the Garden City Hotel, and everybody was having a great time and so forth. And And then we went to Arizona, Nevada for the Las Vegas for a few days, and we went to San Francisco and stayed there, and then we drove up to Fort Lewis, Washington, and spent 3 weeks there, and then that's when we left for Vietnam. In Fort Lewis, we were there for about 3.5 weeks, and because we were going to be going there to replace as replacements for the Army, and they were expecting to have a big action take place in the spring of '67, so it didn't happen. So they decided that we would become the Delta companies of the 1st Division. In this way, each battalion would have 4 companies instead of 3. And we got there, we took the boat over, and the ship left out of Tacoma, Washington on June 29th, 1967. That was my birthday. And we got to the seaport about 7 in the morning. And the guys who went out drinking the night before, the paddy wagons were bringing them in. And they were drunker than hell, many of them. They were sicker than hell also. So the ship finally left around noon out of Puget Sound. Rough body of water, roughest body I'd ever seen, is up and down. And everybody was sick as heck. And I'd taken Dramamine for the next 3 days, the first 3 days before the trip, because I knew that I wasn't seaworthy. Well, I found real fast about details. They would pick details up, and you had to go clean up the puke from all the guys who were sick. And I said, man, I'm not cleaning up after someone is puking. So I found that if I hid in the lifeboats were turned upside down. So I'd crawl in the lifeboats and lay prone till they picked all the details, and then I'd come out. Well, I did that every morning and every afternoon. And I didn't want people to know about it because they would start doing it, and then they would know I was doing it. So I'd lay in there and lay prone, and when they picked the details, then I'd get out and go. We played cards, and every card game there was, and talked. So, but when the ship was leaving Tacoma, my wife and Belmont's wife, they took us to the ship, and I was opening up my scrapbook that she gave me, and she gave me a scrapbook with family pictures in it and stuff, and opened up one page, and there was a pair of cute little panties. And so I kept them in the picture album for the trip. And we got to Vietnam on the day of the 23rd of July. And we were approaching Van Tao, and there was little fishing boats in the bay there. It was the ocean, actually. And we were about 20 miles from shore, because you could see the white sands of Van Tao. And floating in the water, something was floating on the right side of the ship. And I got closer to look, and it was a body with its head cut off. And I said, this is a hell of a welcoming. And so there was actually about 5 bodies floating there. And I said, this is not a good welcoming. So we arrived at the seaport, and the South Vietnamese people were unloading the ship. I felt very uncomfortable about that, and we went down to our sleeping quarters. Naturally, we didn't sleep because the boat was rocking so much from the tide changing, and I was worried about maybe them hooking a landmine up to the ship and blowing it up. Morning time came, and we got up and had a little something to eat, and they had trucks there to pick us up and took us to the airport, and they flew us into Van Tao. They flew us into Benoit, and from Benoit they took another little prop plane that's only 5 miles, and we landed in Xi'an, Vietnam. And there was a band, the 1st Infantry Division band was playing music for us, and I says, wow, this is something. The band's playing for us and everything here. And a little while later, we all got kind of settled down. And the first day there, I'd never seen a dead American soldier before, but a helicopter was coming into land, and it had trouble, and it crashed. And the 4 crewmen on that helicopter burned to death because they didn't have fire equipment there. And so I got to see the fire burn, and the bodies got bigger and bigger from the heat. And I said, this is another hell of a welcome. But we were there and we wrote letters, and they trained us for about 3 weeks in the rear so we could get more training. And the colonel, Colonel Richard Cavazos, he was our colonel, and he stood up in front of us and looked like a giant and said, welcomed us to the 1st Division, 1st Battalion, 18th Infantry. And he told us he would never ask us to do anything. And he said he would, if he couldn't, he wouldn't send us in harm's way unless he had control of everything. And he didn't. He proved to be the greatest leader that anyone could have. He retired from the military as a 4-star general. And he was the first Hispanic American to achieve the rank of 4-star general. And so he was our colonel for the first 6 months. And he realized after the first battles that we were his elite company. So we got to walk point for him more and be his company, because he would take us lead whenever he was in the field. And so we were very fortunate to have him. When he left, that's when things started changing and we started losing people. But, okay, the early training, this is when we arrived in Vietnam, and in basic training and in AIT. Basic training was hard, and so when we arrived in Fort Jackson, we started our training. Each morning you'd have to walk the ladder bars before you could go into the mess hall. So some of the draftees figured they could play sham, like they passed out and they'd fall on the ground from the handlebars. But the sergeant would have us step on them if they wanted to act like they'd passed out. And so after 2 or 3 days, nobody passed out anymore, because he would make every soldier step on that guy that supposedly blacked out. And so we didn't have any passing out anymore. And I learned that you learn fast in the Army. If you get there first, you get to decide what job you want as KP. Now, if you were there last, you would be the pot and pan man. So you were the last one to finish, and you had to constantly wash. So I'd get there first so I could be the dining room orderly. And I would clear the tables and make sure the tables are clean. But so those who weren't good soldiers, they ended up being the pot and pan man, because they wouldn't get up and this and that. And getting your hair cut and getting shots every first few days, your arms would be shot in both arms. And the hair got cut, and I had shin splints so hard because I'd never walked that much prior to it, getting drafted, because I was 25 and the other guys were 18 and 19. But I couldn't let them outdo me, so I would take and march like nothing was wrong, but they'd feel like my shin bones were ripping off the front of my legs. But I was able to show the young guys I could do everything they could do. And then we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, was our advanced training. It was quite intensive training. We felt very comfortable that we would be good, because in that extra training time, you knew who could do good and who wouldn't be good. And so the friendships you made lasted all the way through Vietnam.
What else was AIT like?
AIT was morning to night. You got up at 5 in the morning and you went to bed at maybe 6 at night. And you had to make sure that you made your beds every morning. And I knew how to make beds good because my mama taught us how to do all those things. But people who didn't know how to make beds and stuff, they had a hard time, because the sergeants would just rip all the blankets off the bed and tell them, start over.
You want to talk about the Jody story?
The what?
Jody, the story of Jody.
Jody.
Where did that come from?
Now, Jody was...
That's in basic training?
That was in basic training. It was a fictitious person that was taking care of your loved ones back home. Now, many of the 18 and 19-year-olds had girlfriends, and I was 25 then, but we'd be marching, and the song would go like this here: you don't have to worry about your girlfriend, Jody's home taking care of her for you. And many of them would get upset about Jody. And Jody was real, because you'd get love letters saying that they no longer wanted to be your girlfriend or whatever. And many of the young men would get pretty upset with it. And Jody, I didn't know who Jody was. And you'd go left, 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 right, left, 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 right, left. And you would be double timing most of the time. But you couldn't forget about Jody. Jody was there every day to be sung to.
What happened? Some guys would get those Dear John letters.
Oh, the Dear John letters, that was a hard thing to see. One guy's father he got married when he was on leave, and his father bought his wife out to Fort Lewis on his Harley motorcycle. And this was about probably a 1,500-mile trip. And the lady was quite chippy, and so we got to meet her there, and he was kind of a country boy, and so I wondered about the father's riding on the bike with the wife. And while he was there, he got a Dear John letter that his wife had left him for his father, and it crushed him, devastated him, and they let him come out of the field for a few weeks because it would devastate some guys. The Dear John letters were the hardest thing to deal with. But that happened with quite a few people. Jody came in. Jody took care of them well.
Anything else you want to talk about? The battles?
The battles?
Your first battles?
The first battle, October 1st. We had flown into Phuc Binh, and we didn't know what they were flying us in there for, but a day later, we flew into the start of Shenandoah 2. It was in the Tay Ninh province. And there was word that there was a lot of troop movement there, and it's close to the Cambodian border. So they flew us out there. We had 3 helicopter rides that day. They flew us in a Chinook to a separate landing zone, and the Hueys came in and picked us up to bring us into the combat zone. And so the pilots, we were on the lead choppers. Usually there's 5 choppers in a group, 2, 2, and 1. And I would be on the right flank, being that's in the first platoon. And so when we were flying there, the doors were closed, and the pilot reached around and tapped on the seat to get our attention, and he went, B, C. Looked out the window, and sure enough, there was about 20 VCs DD-mowing there. DD-mowing means run, out. And the trees were all knocked down. They had bought some C-130s in with Daisy Busters. And Daisy Buster is a bomb that when you drop it out, it explodes about 3 feet off the ground. And when it explodes, it knocks everything down around. But some of the trees are so big, so when it knocks them down, you got to climb over them. So when we got there, they said, move out. We secured the area. And then we had to move out and walk about 600 meters, I think, to where our new NDP would be. And we didn't have any contact of those people we had seen there, but they did bring some choppers in and soften up the area while we were going. And so we got to the NDP to dig in, and it's called a night defensive position. So we had to dig in, and it rained that first night so hard. We were digging in, the holes were filling up with water. And we said, this is what it's going to be like to be an infantryman in Vietnam. And so we got dug in that night, and finally about before daybreak, they said we could take a break. Morning came, and we finished digging in, setting up our holes and everything. And we went out on a short patrol just to check the area. And it was, I was on the left flank. I'd either be a flank man or a point man or rear person. I was out on flank, and there's a little trail there, so I'd give security so my platoon could go by, and then the next flank man would take my spot, and I'd catch back up. Well, I was there, and there was we had worked all the areas that we had worked in Vietnam prior to that would be no fire zones or a fire zone. And the no fire zone could be on this side of the street, and the fire zone could be on the other side of the street. So you really never got it down pat. And God forbid if you were to shoot a buffalo or something that was not in a fire zone. So I waved to stop the patrol because 2 NBA soldiers it's a little trail, and I was securing it there, and they walked right past me. But I was afraid to shoot because I didn't know if it was in a fire zone or no fire zone. So finally I got the patrol stopped and went there, and the sergeant says, "How come you didn't shoot him?" And I said, "Because if I would have shot and it was in a no fire zone, you'd want to take and bring charges up to me." But that was a big learning lesson, and we made it back to the unit and finished digging our holes in and getting them set up. Rained every evening. And that next evening, the rain started, and then we started receiving mortars, the thumping sound, and the mortars would be coming in, and they were landing in our NDP. Now, if a mortar hit in mud, there's a good chance it wouldn't go off because it had to have an impact. The mortars were thumping, and Lieutenant Bravenham was to the right of my position, about 3 or 4 positions. And they said a short round, because when you hear the mortar go out and you just go thump, it means it's going to be a short round because the explosive might have gotten wet or something. And he said that short round landed in his position. But he didn't know that till later. But anyway, we were getting mortared, and then we were getting probing fire. In our positions, we hadn't got to clear all the underbrush, so I said where my hole was, there was only 10 or 15 feet between the wood line and my position. And so they were firing and coming in and raining like hell. The ambush went out, and the ambush got hit, but the ambush came back in, but they had to leave 2 men out there because they couldn't find the 2 men. And so they had to leave the 2 men out there overnight. And there was one of them wounded pretty bad. And the colonel called him up and told him he needed a couple of choppers in because he had wounded men. And the chopper of the medevac that was trying to come out crashed. So the colonel told him that, because the weather conditions were so horrific. So that guy died too. But so a little later in the evening, they were still probing and coming in, and we had never been in combat before. Where we could see the Viet Cong coming out of the wood line at us. So we're firing, and the sergeant came around and says, "Stop your firing, you're not firing at anything." So Shelby Davison, he got up and went out there and crawled to the wood line and pulled in 2 dead bodies and put them on top of his bunker. And he said, "Sergeant, look what we got here." And he said, "These look like Viet Cong, don't they?" He says, "So when you say we're not firing at anything, they're right in front of us. They're right here in the ground in front of us." And we got through the night, and the mortar fire stopped and everything. The moon came out, and we were pulling guard duty. And I was sitting there, and I'd seen a movie of World War II in Japan. And there'd be a low fog that would come up about 3 feet off the ground, and there'd be like a haze between it. And in that movie, it showed where you could see the heads of the people, but not their bodies. Well, my mind's kind of playing tricks on me because we hadn't had much sleep. And you're looking, and it's kind of magic. And so I had to make sure that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me because I was watching them dance out there, their heads. And I knew that if I was to fire, it might maybe excite somebody. So we got through the night, and next day we went out on patrol, and they found the 2 bodies of the ambush. And no patrol had reached more than 350 meters outside of the position. An NDP is called a night defensive position, and we had 3 companies with us, so there was about 300 guys in that NDP. And the trees were really tall and big, and the vegetation was really thick. Bamboo groves were so thick you couldn't punch through them. Sometimes you could hear the NVA talking on the other side of the bamboo, and we'd be here, but it might be 50 foot of bamboo, so you couldn't get there. But you could hear them. So there came the 5th day there became the day for me to walk point. First time I'd ever walked point in a combat zone where there's enemy. So we were leading the patrol. There was Jesus Cardile was with me, and Willie Carson. Willie Carson stuttered like hell, but he had a thump gun. And the bullets started coming out of the trees, knocked Willie Carson's thump gun out of his hand. Another guy with me got shot through the shoulder. And the bullets are coming from the trees because they would tie themselves in the top of the big trees. You couldn't see them, but they could shoot down at you. So Willie Carson, they were firing 1,000,000 times a minute. And after maybe a half hour, I don't know if it's a half hour, 20 minutes or whatever, but the company had pulled back and they left Willie Carson, Jesus, and me out there because they had pulled back without letting us know they were moving back. Now, once we realized that, they're saying, we got to move. And I said, no, we can't move, because if we move, they're never going to find us. And I said, wow. So I calmed them down a little bit, and we didn't move. And about a half hour later, I heard someone saying, Campsey, where are you? And it was my friend Steve Deal. We were both point men, and they were supposed to notify us when they were pulling back, but they sent a small detail out to find us, and they found us, and we made it back. But that was my first time walking point. And again, we didn't make it more than 350 meters outside the perimeter. But I think we had 5 wounded that day and no kills. So we were out there for about 10 days in that battle. On the October 6th, the general came out from headquarters to see my colonel. It's in a picture of it in the book over there. And he wanted to see what was going on. And so we pulled out of there after about 10 days because we didn't make any more contact. So Colonel Allen, he was with the 28th Infantry Division, Battalion. And they took over where we were, about 500 meters from where our NDP was. They moved in there, Colonel Allen, and in mid-October, and he got killed. The colonel did, and captain. They said they lost 53 of them, but they also said that they had to leave a lot of them out in the field after the colonel and them were killed. And when we were sitting at the airstrip the next day, there was Chinooks bringing in pallets with a net around it. And we were watching, wondering what the hell they were bringing in and dropping in the deuce and a half. It was bodies of the soldiers that were killed in the battle the day before. Now, people tell me there was 200 and something killed, because if you lose the colonel, sergeant major, lieutenants, captains, they lost their complete command group. And you're telling me that only a total of 53 were killed? And so that was a hard one too, but you didn't fight every day. Sometimes you'd go a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without firing your weapon. But you always had to be ready every day. You had to keep your weapon clean, keep your ammo clean, so that if it did happen, you'd be ready. So from there, we went to the rear again, and we went to Song Bay. and we were at Song Bay for about 11 days. And it's towards the end of October. And we were on, I was on LP that night, and in the distance I could see the tracers going up, white tracers going up, and because the NVAs had white tracers and we had red tracers. So the Snoopy gunships that were above were firing the red tracer from, and the white tracers were going up from the NVA. And I was wondering what the hell was going on, because there's a lot of tracers going up. Well, they brought us in the next day to have a rest in Lac. And we went to the TX, got hamburgers and sodas, and we didn't even clean up our weapons or take a shower, because we figured we would do that later. Well, the next morning at 4:30, they came in and we were sleeping on the ground, kicked everybody's feet and said, "Get up, get packed up. We got to get down to the airstrip." And so it wasn't even daylight yet, but everybody had to get their weapons and web gear up, and they trucked us down to the airstrip. Now at the airstrip, helicopters are coming in, and the helicopters are coming in and setting down on the airstrip. Looked like maybe 100 helicopters. I say 100 helicopters because it might have been 50, but it was a lot. And they were staged. And it's a great picture because the props on the helicopters would be lined up this way here. And being that we were the first platoon and we were at the airstrip, so we would be first on the flights going out. And then behind us would be another group of guys, and behind them would be another group. So each time the chopper would come back, he'd pick up a new refill. Well, we were on the lead chopper on the right side, and there'd be 5 choppers, two, and 1. So we were flying out, and the morning mist was just right over the top of the trees, and it was like kind of mesmerizing to see the fog, or not fog, but just a thin cloud layer. And the choppers were going, and I took a picture of it, and it's just so beautiful because the dew is still on some of the wings. And they dropped us off, and we ran out and secured the area around the rubber trees, so the choppers kept coming in and coming in and coming in and coming in. And they unloaded about 300 people there. And
where did they take you? Where were you now?
Michelin Rubber Plantation, about 50 miles from the Cambodian border. And so there's 350 of us, and we're digging in. And there was, while we were digging in, a group of mountain guards and 2 special forces officers got hit by the NVA. So the captain sent a squad out there to kind of rescue them. And they got out there, and the NVA broke contact. And so there was 28 of the mountain guards. Those are the mountain people. And I'm digging in my hole, and one of the mountain guards was put his hammock up between the rubber trees, and he takes a banana leaf out of his pocket and unfold it, and he's cutting with his knife. He said, "You want VC?" I said, "I don't eat meat." He couldn't understand language, but anyway, he cut a few pieces and nibbled on it. And we dug in our holes and got set up. And we had to go out again because Charlie Company had sent a patrol out, and they got hit too. And three guys were killed in that. And they carried in the bodies. And that was the first time we'd seen dead American soldiers. And they were carrying them in the poncho liners, and their heads would be hanging, kind of dragging the dirt. And it's hard because they knew half hour before the guys were alive, and now their mothers don't know that their children are dead yet, and they're going to be told that they lost their son. And that was shocking to us because that's the first time we'd seen dead soldiers. Well, as the day's going on, we're preparing for the first night in the rubber plantation. Barrington Brown's hole was to the left of mine. And there's a little dirt path that ran through his edge of the perimeter. And Barrington took and he heard noise coming down the trail, and Charlie Companies was right next to us. So our position abutted Charlie Companies, and Barrington heard the noise and he fired, and it was 2 NBA soldiers carrying a stretcher with another wounded soldier on it, but Barrington opened up fire with his machine gun and killed him. But the Charlie Company captain was there the next morning berating him, wanting to know how come he invaded their fire area, because you had a certain fire zone you're responsible for, but Charlie Company must have went to sleep, and so Barrington had to do it because of that. But I just talked to Barrington a little while ago to refresh the story. He was a great soldier. He was from Louisiana, I believe. But so that was the first time that we were getting to see all these different actions. Well, we got up the next day, and Alpha Company went out to go up the hill 207. And Charlie Company, Alpha Bravo Charlie. Alpha Company was going up the hill, and they got hit. So they were able to make it back because it was getting to be evening. So the next morning, they sent an Alpha back up to Hill 207. Well, we were hearing all this firing going on from the NVA and the Alpha Company. A lot of bullets flying. And they were afraid they were being encircled. And we had never gone out on a forced march. But finally, the colonel gave the call, saddle up. And man, we were like cowboys getting ready to ride our horses. And we put our web gear on. We had our ammunition, our rifles, and water. And we started out. And I was on left flank for that patrol going up to rescue Alpha Company. And we're going up the hill. And I look out to the left, and an enemy soldier stood up, fired at me. I hit the ground, and the bullets from his bullets hit me in the face. And about that time, a mountain yard lady was going by. Bullets were flying every place. So we pulled back, and were able to pull Alpha Company back with us. And we went up Hill 207, and that was Colonel Cavazos. He was leading us in the patrol. He received a Distinguished Service Cross for that service. But what a courageous leader. But he wouldn't take us in harm's way. Well, anyway, that day ended. We got back to the perimeter. And each day we would get contact. And so now the day is October 30th. And it's October 31st, actually. October 30th was, I got wounded that day going up Hill 207. And we went back and got saddled up. We went out on ambush on October 31st. And we had movement in the trench behind us. And our ambush was to the front. So we couldn't take and shoot the trench behind us because everybody's facing this way. And maybe a few hundred soldiers, NBA soldiers, passed behind us. And it was kind of spooky because it took a couple of hours for it to occur. And your biggest fear is that someone would snore, jump, or make noise because we didn't wake them up. Now, on November 1st, we got back. And November 1st, I got the day off because if you're on ambush, before you got the next day off. But I was going to be on LP called listening posts. And listening posts were scared too because there'd be 3 or 4 of you a few hundred feet in front of everybody else. And you were considered early warning. So you could warn the rest of them when it's coming in. We were setting up everything, and there was a chopper that came in and dropped off a new 90-day wonder sergeant, and he was playing around with the claymore, and I was down in the trench putting flares, and all of a sudden a claymore went off and blew right over my head. It was by the shitter, a one-hole shitter, and he blew away the whole shitter. Well, that guy was sent out on a chopper when the evening chopper came in because they were dangerous. He could have killed me or anyone else. But that day, so we knew we were going to have movement because when you let 200 soldiers walk past you, they have to be going someplace. So they were hitting us that next night. We were out on LP and the ambushes were going out, and a trip flare went off, and the radio started ringing, what's going on? And we said we had movement, and they blew a flare in front of us, and the ambush just went past them. So they brought in all the ambushes, and as they're bringing in the ambush from Alpha Company, I heard on the radio, in Alpha Company, the last guy at the gate there, you have to count. And the guy says, last man. And 2 more people were coming in hollering ambush. And the guy said he knew that the guy said last man, so he fired on him. It was 2 NBA soldiers that were just saying ambush. And the Alpha Company opened up on him, and the bullet went through the flamethrower, and the flamethrower was burning, because if he would have got inside the perimeter of the flamethrower, he could have opened up a whole section of the company. And so they fired on him, and the flamethrower was burning, and you could see it under the trees because there was a big glow. And so they were bringing in that, and it's happening pretty fast. They're striking at all different areas, trying to probe. And we kept asking them, can we come in? They said, no, you got to stay there. Well, they got pretty close to us because we could hear them talking in the trenches. They had like spoons, and they would tick them, be like a little cricket toy. And that night I set up extra claymores to the front because I figured if 2 claymores were good, 4 claymores were better. So this way, if the front claymores were blown, you still had 2 in the back to use. Well, it went on. Movement was really heavy. And Steve Deal, Chavez, and Icall were with us, the 4 of us. So I kept asking them if we could come in. So I was on the left side of the LP, and there's 3 guys over here. They finally said we could come in. So that meant we had to blow our claymores and get in there. So I gave the 2 guys, I gave the claymores to take care of. The other guy gave him a radio to take care of, and I would take care of the other radio. And the claymores, they blew them. They blew the front ones first, and then the back ones second. The dust hadn't settled when they started making it to the back. It meant we had to run past the trenches, because in the rubber plantation there was trenches between each row of trees. And I would be the last one to leave the position because I was on the left side of it. And they peeled off and they were running in. You have to worry about your own men shooting you, so you say ambush, LP. And they're running with the in there, and they get in there, and I'm the last guy, and I'm running behind them, and all of a sudden I slip and fall in the trench, and because I had the radio on one shoulder, and I fell in the trench, but I took my arms and the side of the trench. I was able to keep myself from falling all the way in it. And I swung my legs up again, didn't miss a step on firm soil, and I started coming in. I got in, and in maybe 5 or 10 minutes after we got in, all hell broke loose. They opened up on machine guns and everything. And my friend Bill Fee got his shoulder blown off, and Willie Carson got shot through the lung. And it was heavy firing. So they brought the helicopters and the gunships and the jets in because they were afraid we were going to be overrun. And there's a good chance we were going to be overrun. But the enemy was to the front. And so the fire was coming directly down the irrigation ditches into our positions. So the enemy had a clear shot coming in. So they told us finally to get in our holes, and they brought the jets and the artillery in on top of us. And that's an eerie feeling because you're in the hole. I just got halfway in the hole because I said, fuck it. I'm not going to take and, I need to see what's going on. So that battle, that lasted for about 45 minutes that we were in the hole. And then they gave us, said, come on out. And Bill Fee had been wounded they had a shot. And earlier in the evening, the NVAs mortared the position and they hit the ammo supply. And so they blew up all of our ammo. So we were running low on ammunition. And so the colonel called up a supply chopper and told him that we needed ammunition ASAP. And so the colonel got on the phone and said to the pilot in the helicopter, told him that he had a couple of seriously wounded veterans that would not make it through the night. And they wouldn't fly a medical chopper out because the bullets were flying so intensely. So the captain in the supply chopper said to the colonel, said, sir, you have them down there, I'll hold up, but you need to have them there immediately because I can't stay on the ground. So the chopper came in, they pushed the ammo out, and they had Bill Fee and Willie Carson there and shoved them inside on the floor of the helicopter. Now, Bill Fee said that he was full of morphine, but he said, Ronnie, I was laying on the floor, and I lifted up my head to look out where the NDP was. He says, all I could see was white tracers coming in and red tracers going out and bullets flying up towards the helicopter. And so Bill Fee made it back, and he survived, but we never knew what happened to him or if he lived. But in 1985, when I marched in the parade in New York City, I met someone who told me how to find the people. We found Bill. He was able to keep his arm, and he was a great, great soldier. He volunteered for the draft, RA, but he died about a year ago. He had pancreatic cancer, and we found him and met Sally, his beautiful wife, but Bill died from Agent Orange poisoning of pancreatic cancer. So we got through that night, and we were there for another few days. And a few days after the main battle of the thing in the rear, the second day after that, we went out on a patrol between Loch Ninh Village and the surrounding area. We were looking for signs to see if they were still in the area. And we had crossed a little creek about 3 or 4 foot wide. And I hate having water in my shoes, so I decided I'm just going to jump across that little stream. Well, a limb caught my trigger mechanism to my M14 and pulled my trigger mechanism out, and it landed in the stream. And I'm looking, and the patrol is leaving over the next little ridge, meaning they're leaving me behind here. And I reached down there, and it wasn't there, and so I waited a minute, and I looked really close at the stream, and I saw an imprint, and I reached down and pulled the trigger mechanism out, shook it off, put it in my weapon, and was running up towards the patrol because I wasn't sure which way they'd gone. So I was going to take and cut a little bit to the right so I didn't have to go all the way around. I stepped over a trench, and there in the trench were 2 NVA soldiers. I didn't know they were dead, but they were sitting there in the trench with their back against the trench. One had a brand new Chi-Com machine gun, AK-47, excuse me, and the other one had a flamethrower on his back. But they were called frozen dead, meaning that an explosion, a bomb or something had blown a few close to them, and the impact killed them. But so I took my weapon and fired 2 rounds to stop the patrol. They came back, they put ropes around them and pulled them out, make sure they weren't booby-trapped. But it was the first time they had discovered Russian weapons being used in Vietnam, because this was a new shipment of weapons that were on these 2 guys there. And And those were, that was probably some of the last battles for those couple of days. We were finally pulled out, I think on November 13th. And we were flying out, and we felt so happy that we were being pulled out of the damn place. While we were in the air, 25th Division had lost their colonel, and they diverted our flight to where they were. And we were going to be security on top of the hill so they could bring the wounded up on the hill and take them out. And I said, kiss my damn ass. I thought we were getting out of there. Now we have to be there. So we were there for an hour or two, and then they flew they flew choppers in to bring us. But I ran off and left my bandolier of M14 bullets. And I had them in a Claymore bag. And so I had to get more magazines and repack when we got back in. And they flew us into Like, and we spent a few days there and regrouped, and that would be towards the end of November. We had Thanksgiving dinner on Highway 13. It was a wonderful thing to have our Thanksgiving dinner. And so we stayed on Highway 13 for a few days, but on December 3rd, 18 quarter cab soldiers went out on ambush, and they were killed. And I was in the rear. I wasn't with them because I was getting ready to go on R&R. But I listened to the battle on the radio, command radio. And Sergeant Chestnut, who was there on his 4th tour, he extended 3 more times. And they said the mortar landed right on him and killed him. And Highway 13. I met Richard Sims in the outhouse and Frank Puente, because Sims was from Amarillo, Texas. He was friends with my cousin when I told him my name. And Puente asked me, do you know where Lytle is? And I said, yeah, my grandfather lived there. So that was in the outhouse on Highway 13. But so we made it through November, and now we had December. And they realized that the fighting we were doing in November was the NVAs moving into Saigon for the Tet Offensive. And that's why there was so much traffic in that area. So that's it. We get into December. December was pretty slacky. We wasn't in a lot of fighting there. When I came back off R&R, the Lieutenant Green asked me if I'd like to be his aide. And I said, yes, sir. He says, do you know how to type? I said, I had 2 years of typing, sir. Then I realized that by the first day I was there trying to do it, I couldn't type. I couldn't get my right hand to move. My brain is like, I could see it, but it wouldn't go through my body, and I couldn't type. I know now that was my first severe case of PTSD. I'd already had a couple of traumatic brain injuries by this time, so we could say maybe, but I couldn't get the right side of my body to move because the right side of the body was in the blast. And so I went and told Lieutenant Green, I said, sir, I can't get my hand to move and I can't type. And he said, well, can you do this? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you can still stay back here, Campsey. I want to keep you here to be my aide. And I stayed there for a while, but I got tired of being there. So Mike Siliberti, the lieutenant, told me to tell him he had to go back out to the field. And I went and told him, and Mike jumped up and smacked me in the jaw. I said, now, Mike, what the hell did you do that for? Because he wasn't going to make it in the field as a soldier because he had too much anxiety. So I went to the lieutenant and told him, I said, sir, I'll go back out in the field. I said, because he'll just get somebody killed. But when I went back out in the field, I had to reprove myself to make sure I wasn't scared, because you have to be sure of yourself, because if you're not, you're jeopardizing the men with you. So my first day back out in the field in early March, I asked them, who's pulling guard duty tonight? And they said, fuck it, we don't pull guard duty. I said, what? Because they were battle fatigued, they were worn out. And I stayed awake all that night. Then a few days later, we were out on patrols and stuff, and we were crossing a river. And there was a rope pulling across, so you'd put your weapon on the rope and let them pull it apart, and you just hold on to it. Well, someone didn't put their safety on, and the M16 started doing the dance. It was shooting, and every time it would shoot, it would bounce on the rope and pull the trigger again. So everybody was hiding and everything, and they finally got the weapon across. That was probably March the 12th. And
I have a question. So you were back in the rear building things while the Tet Offensive happened.
Right, when the Tet Offensive happened. I was
your new guys.
The new guys when they were coming in. And so I helped build the barracks and fix the vehicles. I stole a generator for the company because Camo had all these new generators over there, and I couldn't keep fixing this damn generator because you could get TV on till 9 o'clock. So I said, well, hell, Camo has all these generators over there. So I went over there and took their generator, one of their new generators, and bought it back and hooked it up so we'd have a generator running. And I think I took the old one and took it up there and left it where the generators were. But so every month, a lieutenant would come around and do inventory. Every company had to be, so the lieutenant came to me, a captain is a captain. Captain came to me, says, Sergeant, would you know where that generator came from? I said, no, sir, I just came in from the field and it was here, but I says, I don't know anything about it. And because you had to be creative. And yeah, it was, but when I went back out to the field, it was, when they didn't pull guard duty, it upset me very much because they were worn out. And the attitude was really, fuck it. And I wanted to live. And they feel that probably PTSD might originate from the deprivation of sleep. When you stay awake 24 hours a day, your brain changes. And I stayed awake 24 hours a day for about 3 months, 4 months. I'm not saying I didn't get a nap here and nap there, but I stayed awake because I didn't trust my guys. One time we were going out on ambush and two of the new guys didn't have a second radio on. I sent them back to get the second radio to go out on ambush. And I hated going out late to get an ambush set up. And this was in March. And the ambush, it was on top of the mountain on Highway 13. And so I had them go back to get, and they didn't come back. And I went back and they were inside the little hooch, the tent, the poncho liner. And I crawled in there, and there they were. They had the munchies. They'd smoked a little pot. And I crawled inside and I grabbed a hold of their shirts and I pulled their heads together and I said, guys, I said, I want to tell you something. I said, I might have to write the letter to your parents and tell them why I killed you. I said, because when you do stuff like this, you're jeopardizing everybody in our patrol, in our ambush. And I said, if you ever do this to me again, I'll kill you myself. And they never did. And those are just some of the stories of being a combat infantry soldier in Vietnam. It was fun in a way because the camaraderie you shared was so special. But a Vietnam veteran's in last night. He was in grave service. He said, Ronnie, he was there at the same time I was, 67 and 68. He was in 1st to the 25th Infantry. They were right next to us. And he said, I wouldn't take $1 million for it, what I went through, but I'd never want to live a day of it over. And that's the thing, the camaraderie you shared was so special. And so I'd like to record these stories because I'd like to have people understand what it was like for a soldier, family. So I think I'm about finished for the day.
It's good. He has a lot of pictures that you can add while those battles were going on.